Welcome back to the Chiro Money Show, where we help chiropractors make better financial decisions so they can build stability and a lifestyle that they love. We're your hosts, Chris Shield and Scott Campbell of Align Wealth. Welcome back.
How are we doing today?
Doing good, man. It's good.
Yeah.
Nice sunny day. Can't complain.
Gorgeous. We need to get out for a run here right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have some time for that. It's supposed to warm up.
That's right. It's time to get outside. It's time to get outside a lot more. We've been missing some of that for sure.
Yep.
Had a really great guest on the show today. Had an awesome conversation with our guest, April Stroink. So April, she's a certified CFO and advisor for small business owners based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia. What makes April, I think, such a great fit for coming on the show is that she spent a lot of her career working specifically with health and wellness practitioners, much like a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, who are incredible at what they do in practice, but never really got the true roadmap for the financial side of running a practice. I personally known April for 5, 6, 7 years now. I first connected with her when I first started learning about Profit First and that system. We've talked about that on previous shows for sure. We're going to touch on it in today's conversation as well. But such an awesome conversation with April.
Yeah, it was really great. I know we were both looking forward to this one. And yeah, we kind of didn't really get into the nuts and bolts of Profit First, but there's that underlying element and all that we discussed is systems and structure and Profit First. I really like how April has coined this term, the Chief Financial Wellness Officer, and how she says that every practice owner needs to be their own Chief Financial Wellness Officer for their practice, right? So she shared a bit more about that. And then also we had a really good conversation about kind of building your team and what you should be, how you should go about building your financial wellness team as a practice owner. Yeah.
Let's dive into the episode.
Here we go.
Here's our conversation with April Stroink.
All right. April Stroink, welcome to the Chiro Money Show. We're excited to have you as a guest today.
Thank you, Chris.
Really curious. So obviously you and Scott go back, you got a bit of history. Fill us in on your unique origin story of how you came to do what you do today.
Okay. Well, I've been in financial services since 1999, so 27 years now. And I was classically trained, if you will, as an advisor, getting people to retirement and building their safety net. And one of the things that I found is we would put these beautiful plans together for people. And then, you get a call 6, 7 months later of, "Ooh, I'm going to have to reduce my pack," or "I'm going to have to stop my pack." And I'm like, "Well, why? We put this gorgeous plan together for you and it all made sense on paper. What's going on?" And then realize, we weren't trained on the behavioral side or the cash flow side of, yeah, this makes sense on paper, but we're taking the human element out of it and people spend behaviorally, not rationally. And so what they told us they're spending or what they are having money left over or what have you is not the actual fact, because we all have cognitive biases when it comes to our money. And so in 2017, really shifted my practice to studying behavioral finance. And at the time, my husband and I owned a retail business together and we had sold that. And I can talk about that origin of my story as well. And came across this book called Profit First. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is Mike in my living room. Does he know my story? And really started to put in practice in the retail business and it started to work. And then, like I said, when we sold everything off and I went back into practice, I'm like, I want to do things differently. I want to work with business owners and I want to concentrate on the cash flow side of things versus the investment, retirement, insurance side of things. So totally switched my practice from commission-based to planning-based and working with, in this case, multidisciplinary clinics and really, again, building out cash flow systems for them. So that's what I've been doing since 2017.
Cool. Can you tell us a bit about the retail business? Here you are as a financial advisor, you have that experience and education training, and you're also running a retail business, but I'm guessing that didn't quite go as smoothly, or it wasn't going as smoothly. You didn't maybe have the systems and cash flow plan in place in that business. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah. So as you know, in our industry, there's this thing called OBAs. And because of, which are outside business activities, and because I was a 50-50 shareholder of the businesses, I had to be a silent partner for the first 13 years because I wasn't able to hold my license and be an active partner in the business because of the OBAs. So as you know, we are a very regulated industry, which I think is really important, which really drives me crazy when you see somebody get on TikTok or Instagram or something else that doesn't have the credentials that we have, and isn't regulated like we are, giving advice that, of course, impacts people's money and their lives.
Yeah.
For the first, that's another tangent, but like for those first 13 years, I was a silent partner. And then my husband came home one day and he was kind of bitching, complaining about, small business in Nova Scotia and regulations and everything else. And I said, either do something about it or we're not having this conversation anymore, not thinking he'd put his name on the ballot, which he did. And so he ran for provincial politics and he was successful, which meant that he couldn't be part of the business anymore. So I had to take over the family business, which means I had to sell my practice. So
Interesting.
here I am, not really being fully versed in the business. I mean, I don't even like to shop. And here I am running 4 retail locations, an online business, and a consultancy. And I started to really peel back the layer. And classically, we had put our trust in a bookkeeper who, I'm just going to say, had grossly misrepresented her skills of running a multi businesses. And so when I started to really do a deep dive, I found out that we had made decisions around growth for books that weren't accurate. And as I went in every day, peel back another layer, it became very apparent that we were in trouble. So immediately sold off some of the businesses, had to shutter, pull a runner in the middle of the night, and others. I'm not proud of that, but we had to do that. And really started to look at the balance sheet and really work on the balance sheet, bringing it up to the point that we were able to sell it. And so in 27 had sold off everything. We chased top line revenue. So top line revenue, but what we didn't factor in, and which I think you'll see with the chiropractors that you work with and the multidisciplinary clinics that I work with, they think adding more associates, adding more locations is going to solve their cash flow problems. And what it does is it just exasperates them. And that would be our story too. Yeah, we moved from $1 million in sales to $2 million in sales, but our expenses tripled. And we were stretched because now we were having to manage multiple locations. In some case, one of those locations was 45 minutes away.
Mhm.
And it was a house of cards. And
Yeah.
where we didn't have the proper structure in place, we didn't have what we thought I call your wealth care team. So we thought we had our wealth care team in place. And in particularly the trusted bookkeeper wasn't the
Mhm.
case. I do have to say my accountant was excellent. They worked in an advisory role. I'd say that they saved my life, honestly. He had his suspicions in regards to the books, and I sat down and had lunch with him, and I listened to that. And then, yeah, we sold everything off. And like I said, I remember we owned the building. I remember putting my hand on the building and saying, when I get out of this, it's going to be my mission to help others not make the same mistakes. And I was really
Mhm.
attracted to Mike McAllowitz's mission of ending entrepreneurial poverty, because I
Mhm.
think so many entrepreneurs, they get into business for all the right reasons, and
Yeah.
then but they aren't business owners, and they really aren't versed in the financial side of their business. And what happens is, they start taking a second mortgage out on their home or depleting all of their retirement savings in hopes that they're going to get that return back from their practice or their business. And it's very rare that you do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunately too common, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the thing too. When I started to speak to my peers and what have you, what I realized was there's a lot of businesses out there that were like ours, that their bookkeeper, bookkeeping is not a regulated profession in this country. And so basically you can take a QuickBooks course, call yourself a QuickBooks Pro advisor, and now hang out your shingle as a bookkeeper. And not to diss the profession. However, I've seen a lot of businesses get themselves into trouble because they don't have the right people and the right systems in place when it comes to their finances.
Touching on that topic of bookkeeping, we've seen a lot of that too. We've seen great bookkeeping, and then we've seen bookkeeping that's just not allowing the practice owner to understand where they're at. They don't understand their
Hmm.
numbers. Even if they pulled out their profit and loss account and their statements, not understanding it because it's not correct doesn't do them any favors in terms of making smart decisions about how to move forward with their business.
Exactly.
I'd love to hear your kind of thought process on, I think you've talked a lot about how you need to be what you've coined a chief financial wellness officer of your practice.
Mhm.
Tell us more about that, because I know a lot of that's tied to understanding your numbers and reviewing your financial statements. I'd love to go there with you and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as the business owner, the proverbial buck stops with you. If CRA is going to audit you, they're not coming after your bookkeeper. They're not coming after your accountant. Is you as the business owner. And I find a lot of practitioners, because they don't see themselves as truly as business owners, because they've had zero education on that in
Mm.
during their schooling, they think that if they hire a bookkeeper or they hire a accountant, that they can just wash their hands of it and that side of their business is done. And it's not until all of a sudden cash flow becomes a problem or their taxes are due and the money is not there and they start to pay attention and they don't even know really where to turn. So I have a course called Wealth Care 101 where I teach practitioners the basics of a business finance, but to let them know that they can't abdicate this to anybody else. They have to have their pulse on it, or they should really just go work for somebody else, honestly, if they don't want to look at that side of their business. So, the chief financial wellness officer, it really comes again from the play that I work with healthcare professionals, but it's the same as your health, right? We have to advocate for our health. If we don't advocate for our health, who's going to? And so we also have to advocate for our wealth. And, there's institutions out there that profit from our ignorance when it comes to our health, and the same is true for our wealth as well. And if you are a chiro or you are a naturopathic doctor or an RMT or a physio, or a medical doctor, the banks are willing to give you a lot of money, but they don't
Yep.
give you the education to go with it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's a lot of harm that comes with that. So, but it's up to
Mhm.
you. Like, I don't blame my bookkeeper for what happened. I'm disappointed and deeply hurt, but we weren't paying attention.
Right.
And we gave the keys to the kingdom basically over to this person. And so shame on us. And so again, it's like our health. We can't just, take that magic pill or what have you. We have to exercise. We have to eat healthy. We have to have people on our health team. It's the same with our wealth as well. So,
Mhm.
you as a business owner, you can't pass this on to anybody else. It's you.
You make such a great point. And I like what you said that, if you aren't willing to put the energy and effort in to understand your numbers, then you should probably just go work for somebody else. And there's nothing
Hmm.
wrong with that explicitly. You can be a great associate at a practice, at a different clinic. Like there's lots of options out there. And yeah, like you said, also as well, I would say everybody we've come across is in business, in practice for the right reason. They love what
Hmm.
they do. They love helping
Hmm.
people restore their health and live a healthy, active lifestyle. That's the great part about it. The unfortunate part is they haven't had the training in running the business, and they might not even have the desire to be the business owner. They just want to help
Hmm.
people be healthy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And they've been told that they'll create more wealth. It's better in the long run if they just run the business themselves versus maybe starting out as an associate or being a career associate for that matter.
Yeah,
Hmm.
which is not always
Yeah,
true, right?
and no, and then you do the math and you realize the owner is still practicing. And in addition to practicing, they're also running the clinic and they're not getting paid to run the clinic. And a lot of times their fees are going into running the clinic and they're worse off than what they were before. And
Hmm.
so I don't think same thing as being a career associate. And it's hard, right? Because to charge for health is hard. I'm not denying that. However, financial well-being is one of the four pillars to good overall health. And so doctors are telling others, exercise, take care of your mental health, take care of your spiritual health. But a lot of times what we know to be true is that if you're financially unhealthy, it manifests itself in your body. It manifests itself in stress. And so, their patients could be coming to see them because the underlying issue is actually money related. And then you have a doctor who's stressed about money, who's trying to help a patient. And so it's just this continuous roundabout. And what we need to do is what I always say is sunlight's the best disinfectant. Let's bring it all out into the open. let's see how much you owe. Let's see what your margins are. I just recently did that with a multidisciplinary practice, and what we found was their AR was, they had aged AR of almost 6 months, and they had already paid the doctors on their associate doctors on money they hadn't yet collected. And I'm like,
Mhm.
this is why. But again, it's like, if you don't have the financial statements from your bookkeeper, what I call, they're the labs, right? Just like you would run blood work or just like you would do diagnostics so that you can understand what's going on. That's what your labs are. But that's what your financial statements are for the financial health of your business. But if you can't rely on that information because you don't think it is correct, good luck trying to pinpoint where the problem is and then developing a treatment plan in
Mhm.
regards to that. So it all comes down to, again, who's on your team, the accuracy of the data. Thank goodness a lot of clinics, run an EMR, and I really like Jane, and you can get that really great reporting off of Jane as well. But yeah, it is essential. I just think it's kind of ironic that you're in a healthcare profession, but you're ignoring one of the pillars, which is your financial well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned team. Tell us from your perspective, how should a practitioner go about building their financial wellness team, and what should they be looking for when they're doing that?
Well, your first hire to your team is going to be a bookkeeper. And they're essential member of your team because the bookkeeper records the day-to-day transactions that are happening inside of the clinic. And so they're the one that has the raw data that needs to be input. So you've got to be really conscious of who you're interviewing and or hiring. And so I have interview questions for doctors that they can use when hiring a bookkeeper. You also have to understand you get what you pay for, right? It's one of those classic things where, okay, I'm going to skimp out on my bookkeeper. And I'm like, do not do that. Like they're an
Mhm.
essential part of your team. And actually, it'll save you money for your accountant if your bookkeeping is done really clean. So your first hire is going to be your bookkeeper, and you should really vet them. And one of the things that I always say is a litmus test is, asking them questions like, are you going to help me build out my chart of accounts? Are you going to reconcile my accounts on a monthly basis? How much interaction are we going to have? And oftentimes, what I see is the bookkeeper, the tail's wagging the dog, that comes to the doctor and says, "Yeah, I am going to do a stand, like, I'm not going to ask you about what it is that you want to see in your practice, but I'm going to build out the chart of accounts, or I only reconcile every 3 months, every quarter, or I use, Waves or some other program that we know is not going to be helpful for a doctor." So the doctor really has to know what it is that they want to be measuring. And only then seek out the bookkeeper that can do those duties for them. And again, you can't skimp out. Like you should be looking at someone who's $50 an hour for bookkeeping, 35 to $50 an hour for a public bookkeeper. I think that's really important. Your second hire is going to be the CPA, or maybe an injunction with, especially if they're an IPC. And so that CPA or the accountant, they're the ones that take the data from the bookkeeper and then turn that into reports that the doctor then can use and have those conversations with. So many times I see a doctor get into a relationship with an accountant that's purely transactional. They only see them at
Mhm.
tax time. And
Yep.
the whole purpose is to save as much taxes as they possibly can, which is at the detriment to the doctor, especially if they're looking to grow and expand their practice, because now you've just written off everything you can to make your taxes as low as possible. You take that to the bank, and the bank's like, you're not making any money. You're not bankable. We're not going to fund your growth and your expansion.
Mhm.
So you have to have that advisory
Mhm.
relationship with your accountant. And I always say, use an accountant that knows chiropractic businesses, use an accountant that knows naturopathic medicine, use somebody that is working in that niche, because you don't have to explain the business to them. They have 5 other clients that has a similar business, and they can come to you and work with you in that advisory capacity. Also on your wealth care team needs to be a lawyer. Not that you need to have somebody on retention, but there's a lot of contracts in medicine. And there's a lot of structure. And so having somebody that like, and trust, your banker. I just got off the call with a banker that I'm going to work with on referral basis because, a doctor needs a good banker. And then, of course, you as financial advisors or me as, money coach or fractional CFO is somebody that can bring all these pieces together. But at the top of the hierarchy is the doctor or the business owner. They are the chief
Hmm.
financial wellness officer, and they are the ones that are directing everybody on the wealth care team. And just like in medicine, if your team is working together, you will be healthier. So your team should all be interconnected, or what I called at our retail business, my board of advisors. These are the people that I came to, and I had them all sit at the table together so that they're working in my best interest to move the practice forward.
Can you share a bit more about accountants and advisory work versus tax filing engagements?
Well, if accountants like to do advisory roles, I wouldn't have a job because what I find is that they are transactional. It just seems to be the nature of the profession for whatever reason. I mean, they're leaving a lot of money and relationships on the table, but what we see is a lot of times that they only see them at tax time, and that's the only time that you have. And I think as well, like a lot of doctors are hesitant to talk to their accountant because they feel every time I pick up the phone to call my accountant, it costs me money. So therefore, I'm not going to do that. But a
Yeah.
good accounting firm is going to have somebody that's on a junior level as well that can field those questions for you. Or maybe you're on a retainer package, or so that you don't feel that hesitancy to contact your accountant. But
Hmm.
working with an accountant that wants to work in an advisory capacity with the doctor in the clinic is so very important. I myself personally, I don't love having my bookkeeper working with my as an employee of my accountant. I have the two completely separate because I want to have that unbiased three set of eyes on my books. So I look at my books, my bookkeeper looks at my books, my accountant looks at my books, all independently of each other.
Yeah.
That's my personal preference. But,
Hmm.
as a fractional CFO, I really work as the liaison between the business owner and the accountant and the bookkeeper. And, I need to be on the same page as the accountant as far as structure of the business is concerned because our client is the doctor and their financial well-being is what we're looking for. So you really do want to seek out an accountant who's going to be more in that advisory versus transactional role.
Yeah. We've noticed the same thing. There's not a lot of advisory work being done from CPAs that we've noticed with our clients. And that's where people like you or us come in and often fill that need for some advisory
Hmm.
and collaboration and kind of spearhead starting those conversations with the CPAs that
Hmm.
they
Exactly.
have not had yet.
Hmm.
You probably seen this too, April, with healthcare professionals. Oftentimes, like what they're best at doing is being a practitioner and
Right.
doing that work. But if they can put that true hat on of I'm the chief financial wellness officer of my business. I need the right people. I need the right team that I can then trust and not only trust, but collaborate with and be advised and have that advisory collaborative relationship. That's where you're going to see the results. That's where you're going to see your financial well-being improve. And ideally, like stress levels come down so that when for a chiropractor, when they're at the table with their patient, they're thinking about the patient, not like
Hmm.
the dollars in the back of the head. Like, am I going to, what's overhead going to be this month? Do I have enough volume this week? Like, hopefully that kind of removes that from their thinking in their space so they can focus on what they do best.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And again, like when people come through my Wealth Care 101 course, say the goal of this is not to turn you into being your own bookkeeper. The goal of this is not for you to be your accountant, but the goal of this is to have that foundation so that you know the questions to ask and that you're curious in asking those questions. There's so much shame for business owners to think I should know this stuff. And so I'm not going to ask the question because I don't want to look foolish. But you can't have a CPA come into a chiropractic clinic and do the work of the doctor. Why would the doctor ever think that they should know, the ins and outs of accounting or bookkeeping in their field? So
Yeah.
yeah, they should hire out for these, but again, they need to be having that basic so that they can at least ask those curious questions that they need answered. And on the flip side of things, their accountant or their bookkeeper should be able to explain things in, plain everyday language to the doctor so that the doctor understands. I always find that's a litmus
Hmm.
test too. If somebody can't explain it to you in like grade 4 language so that you can understand, it's not the person that you want on your team.
Sure.
We see that all the time, April, especially with accountants. And like, I'm not trying to disparage accountants. Like a lot of them do fantastic work, but oftentimes, like even for myself, I feel like I'm well versed, with my background in finance, even going to see my own accountant, sometimes it's like, you're not making this simple enough.
Mhm.
Bring this down a notch to allow me to understand. When I think about healthcare professional, it's probably even more so like I need this broken down so I understand it clearly. If someone's going to go through my profit and loss statement or my balance sheet, like tell me so I can understand and actually then take that information and go apply it.
Absolutely. I mean, I had been in finance for 14 years when my bookkeeper the books were a mess, right? And so I can't even imagine if somebody who hadn't been in finance trying to unravel that would
Yeah,
be what it would be like.
for sure. I mean, you've kind of alluded to this, but when I think of hiring the right team members, like your accountant or your bookkeeper, it's like, do they, and your financial planner or coach or what have you, do they have the heart of a teacher? Are they
Hmm.
willing to answer all those questions? Do they like provide an open space where those questions are welcomed and accepted and there's no dumb question that you could ever ask? That's what
Exactly.
you really want.
Yeah.
Not the people that are just going to breeze over your questions and not validate you and give you that time and space that you deserve.
I found
Yeah.
in my tenure on this earth as well, if someone can't explain it to me, it means usually they don't understand it themselves. So,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
again is for me a red flag.
I'd love to go back to a comment that you made earlier that you've seen firsthand around chasing top line revenue and then stepping back and really thinking more about the systems that you need to implement that again work with your natural human behaviors around managing money on a month to month basis. Can you speak more to that and what you do for your clients and your background with Profit First and now into the CFO project?
Well, I think, it's like they talk in Profit First when Mike talks about axioms, right? So axioms are beliefs that prior generations believed to be true. So future and present generations believe that as well. And one of those in the entrepreneurial world is sales minus expenses equals profit. And so it's all about sales, sales, sales. If I just see 20
Mm-hmm.
more clients, all or patients, all of my financial problems will be gone. And then all of
Right.
a sudden, they increase from 20 hours to 40 hours. I don't know any doctor that does that, but let's say they do. And all of a sudden they see I'm burning out and it's not yielding me anything more. And so a lot of times what I find is, there's three reasons why you have that's why I really get my doctors to look at their gross profit and their gross profit margins because, you got to have enough gross profit in order to run your operations. And what happens is they take the top line revenue and put it all into operations and then, oh, whoops, I got to go back and pay the associate doctor. So it's not about increasing that revenue. It's about increasing the margins. And so usually comes down to three things. Number one, the price is not correct. And I'll get to that in a second. Number two, their associates, maybe they're paying them too high of a split. Or number three, they just don't have a viable practice or they don't have a viable product or service. And no matter how much money you pour into that bucket, you've got a hole at the bottom that as soon as you pour more into it, it's going right out the bottom. And what happens is the business owner then just becomes burnt out. And that's when things really start to unravel. So we need to take a look at what is it that you're selling? What is the product? What is the service? What is your price strategy? So many times I hear the doctor say, well, I'm going to base that on what the chiropractor's doing down the street. Well, you have no sweet clue what that practice is like. It could be bleeding money, and all that you're doing is just doing the same. I've had doctors say, well, I can't change my splits with my associates because they'll just leave and they'll go down the street. Let them go because every time they make a sale, you're losing money.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you're bringing in a product or service maybe to also have an in-house dispensary or they're running an IV suite and they don't run the math on it and it's actually not a viable product, but they can't see that because it's all lumped into one revenue line and something else could be masking it. So it's not about, don't get me wrong, you need sales. It's the oxygen of the business. We all need sales and cash coming in. But up from that, we need profit. And so if you're not building profit into everything that you sell, you're going to eventually run into a cash flow problem. So we need to flip that switch of what is profitability? And it's very hard in healthcare as well for owners to wrap their head around that it's a business that has to make money.
Yep.
Therefore, it's not here as a non-for-profit so that other doctors can come and leave and have a good time and then leave at the end of the day and the business owner is stuck with everything. Like it has to be profitable. And
Hmm.
so then they start to look at, okay, well, maybe I'll run courses or maybe I'll do group programming or maybe I'll do this and maybe I'll do that. And they also don't take a look at, again, is this going to be profitable? Is that what you need to be doing? Because all I find is that you're adding more hours in. So
Yeah.
really taking a look at gross profit first. And then, I have benchmarks of what those percentages should be. And then from there, taking a look at the next driver, which is around profitability of what are your operating expenses. And,
Hmm.
there is such a draw for health professionals to have beautiful offices that,
Hmm.
look pretty. And, yeah, but my patient comes in and they're super relaxed, or, we have this, or we went out and bought the best Pilates table or what have you. And like, you can't afford that. Like, I don't buy into the adage of fake it before you make it. I've very rarely seen that work.
Hmm.
And so again, like if you flip the switch, you make do with what you have with your expenses, so then you can become more profitable. And
Yeah.
it's profit first is not profit before people. It's not profit before planet. It's not about being greedy. What I say to my doctors is that if you're not profitable, you're not going to be in business. And if you're not in business, you're not going to be able to serve your community. You're not going to be able to serve your patients. And if not you, then who? So it's
Hmm.
really about kicking this, just changing that narrative of top line sales, top line sales, top line sales, another sale, another patient will solve all my cash flow problems. It just, like you said, kicks it down the road.
Hmm.
It'll
Hmm.
eventually be a problem that they can't ignore. It's kind of like in
Hmm.
health, right? Like right now, I'm sitting with this probably a hairline fracture on my foot, but I want to go snowboarding. So therefore, I'm not going to go see the doctor and I'm going to keep playing pickleball and I'm going to keep complaining about it. When really, if I just went and got the foot fixed and got off of it for a few weeks, I'll do these things in the future. But, our own ways of that as well. Like stop, evaluate, let's extract this and start to take a look at where are we bleeding and we need to stop it. And also, like what I say is there's the symptoms are for the underlying problems. Like
Yeah.
with a practice that we were just working with, what we found out was they're having a cash flow problem. We took a look and they weren't charging no-shows but paying out the doctors. So,
Simple.
and for us, we could be like, that's pretty simple, but it wasn't, because they weren't taking the time to, or they didn't even know how to extract those numbers to take a look. And
Yeah.
then when we were able to show in Jane how you can find this out, and they're like, oh my Lord, we've not been getting credit cards, and you can do that right in Jane with a first patient. So first
Hmm.
patient doesn't get a credit card in. So now we can go back and say that's an SOP for the front desk of anytime a new patient, doesn't matter if they're calling from the car, call back with your credit card and then we'll get you in, right? That's the SOP. And then no doctor gets paid if somebody doesn't show up. But which
Yeah.
again, we can all sit here and go simple, but
Yeah.
if you're not taking the time or you don't have that data to support it,
Hmm.
it's not as simple.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a bit of a practical question on maybe like multidisciplinary practices or practices that have multiple service offerings or products, say, in their practice. Do you recommend that they in their bookkeeping structure that in a way that it's separated? It's not all flowing into top line revenue and then just distributed from there. Like how would you go about looking at that from a high level?
Absolutely. I listened to a podcast a while ago and it was Bill Gates, and I know that we're supposed to be canceling him right now. But he had said, the interview asked him, it seems like you have the Midas touch. Everything that you do is just profitable. How do you do it in your philanthropy, in your, at Microsoft, what have you, everything you do? And he said it's very simple. I boil it down to cost per unit. And if the cost per unit, if I can't make margin off of it, I don't do it. So yes, I have that philosophy of everything that you're selling in the clinic needs to have its own chart of account. And that chart of account on the sales side also has to have the corresponding cost of goods chart of account, so that we can take a look at the margin of each of these to see which are the margin builders and which are the margin detractors. And then from there as well, we can also see what are the loss leaders, right? So if you're a naturopathic clinic and you're running labs, you have to run labs in order to see what's happening so you can build out a treatment plan. but your regulatory body doesn't allow you to profit on labs. So, you have a margin neutral product, but we know that it's supporting, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in naturopathic services because you have that lab running. But what I often see as well is like if someone has an in-house dispensary and they've got 6 doctors and their in-house dispensary, and this actually happened, I'm like, this is making 0 sense. You've got 6 doctors, you've had X amount of first-time visits, and your dispensary is like $200 or $300 a month. Your doctors are not using your dispensary; they're selling somewhere else. And sure enough, we found that they each had their own full script, and the owner was wild about that, right? As she should be. And so if you don't have the data, like I was saying about the no-shows not being charged and the doctor being paid, you don't have the data broken down, Chris. Like there's zero way that you can measure what is actually profitable inside of the clinic.
I'd love to talk about margin of safety with you, April. I think you're really big on building margin of safeties in the systems and the way you think about someone's cash flow,
Yeah.
reserves, and not only that, but probably insurance and breathing room just to make sure that you're not running so tight. How do you think about margin of safety when it comes to working with clients?
Margin of safety seems to be my mantra for 2026. And I think of everything that's going on in the world right now, it should be everybody's mantra for 2026. Margin of safety changes a problem from being a problem to being a panic situation in its absence. So, I started my career in 1999, and somewhere along the way, so it was this whole you don't need an emergency fund, just use your line of credit. That's what a line of credit is for. That is not what a line of credit is for. And yes, money has been cheap. And so instead of saving, what people were doing were relying on cheap money. And we saw that come to roost in 2022, 2023, when interest rates went through the roof and people couldn't, afford it. So a margin of safety at its very base level, and of course, margin of safety, as you know, is a personal investment term, but I think it also can carry over to a business is,
Yeah.
inside of your practice, you need to have that cushion. And I also recommend for all of my doctors to get a line of credit as well. But having that cushion, because let's face it, they're in an industry that if they're not seeing a patient, they're not getting paid. So what happens when your kid's sick and you have to take time off? Or what happens when you're sick and you have to take time off? Or Christmas, or if spouse gets sick or what have you. Like these things happen. Bumps in the road happen in life. We can't avoid them. But a margin of safety makes it smoother. So that's what I love about the profit first system is because when you put money into the profit account, half of it is for a margin of safety for the business. The other half, of course, comes to paying the doctor for taking the risk of owning their practice. But building up that margin of safety is really important. And, 3 to 6 months of practice expenses, if you can have that, great. I mean, that takes time. But the
Yeah.
cheapest way that we know to do this is, most inexpensive way that we know how to do this, build its margin of safety, is through insurance. And so many times a doctor looks at insurance as a liability when really insurance should be looked at for an asset. Because if something happens, that's when the insurance policy steps in. That's obviously the nature of insurance. But so many times, I've seen things that have happened that, oh my gosh, if you'd had insurance, this wouldn't be a panic situation. This would be a problem. And, this has happened in my life of last year. At the end of 2024, our wastewater pipe broke in our house. And 8 days before Christmas, we had wastewater coming in because they're building a hospital across the street from us, and they broke our pipe when they dug up the street. But, there was nothing more comforting than calling my broker and saying, this is happening. He said, April, you have the best water coverage that you can possibly have. We got you. There was that was just such a good feeling. Now, my coverage was $50,000 and it was a $73,000 bill. So I had to cut it with $23,000. I have an emergency fund to do that. That's the margin of safety. Then flash forward to February 2025, my husband was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and we have critical illness policy. And the critical illness policy paid out, which gave us a second opinion. We have an endocrinologist privately now in Toronto that works with his team here in Halifax. We've been able to get a second opinion. And on top of that, it let me step away from my practice to be with him. he's also self-employed, allowed him to step away from his practice for us to be together. We've gone to Brazil, we've moved down to the country, all kinds of things because of that margin of safety. And so, I had a doctor today in my Wealth Care 101 class say, I'm 30 years old, I'm not married yet, I'm just starting out my practice. Why would I ever need insurance? And I'm like, because life is going to happen. It's going to happen to you. And you're never as young as you are at 30, and you're never as healthy as you are. We have to build these margins of safety, especially as business owners, because guess what? Nobody's coming to save us. When COVID happened, it was the first time I felt like I was collectively in this place together, and the government did step up for us as business owners. We can debate that, but I didn't have that in other times of dips inside of my business. You need to provide yourself with that margin of safety before you buy a new system for your business or a new chiropractic table or whatever it is. You got to think about margins of safety because there will be bumps in the road. And hey, I get it when you get out of school and they've been in school forever and they have student debt, high student debt, there's that knee-jerk reaction to reward yourself. I totally get that. And I've been there, but it comes back to, the wealthy barber of paying yourself first and having that margin of safety in place. And then with what's left over, have a good time.
For sure. Yeah. I'd love to talk to that 30-year-old doctor about his earning potential over the course of his career. Pardon me. She might be able to earn $5 to $10 million over the course of the next 30 years of her career. If you owned a $5 million house, would you not pay to insure it? Of course you would. And so that's a big risk when you're not insuring your future potential earnings with a professional level disability contract.
Yep, absolutely. But you also got to remember where you're at 24 and 30 as well. It's that whole of foreseeing into the future. And I guess now where I'm on the other end of it, where, I'm using that margin of safety, just trying to, preach to that is the margin, having a margin of safety is so, so very important, especially for small business owners.
Yeah. Cool. Well, a couple last questions before we wrap up. Obviously you work with different healthcare professionals, some of them chiropractors. If we have for our chiropractors that are listening now, and then maybe they've been putting off looking into their numbers or avoiding some of this hard stuff, what is the one thing you would want them to take action with or advise them to start with? Maybe the sunshine.
Yeah, that's right. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Just get your head out of the ground. But I really, truly believe is that open up a savings account, label it margin of safety, and start putting 1% of your revenue into that account. Do it for 3 months. And if you have to pull it out, you have a cash flow problem happening inside of your business. And it's a really great litmus test. Just open that account and start funneling 1% in there.
It's great.
Such a great habit to build off of. And I'm with you, April. I think the mantra of margin of safety is a pretty good one to bring into the year 2026. With everything going on in the world, for sure. Not with insurance, with cash flow, with buffers, with the right systems, with the right team. They're all connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, last question for you is, where is the best place for people to find you and learn more about your work and what you do?
Well, I'm in all of the regular places, although I'm finding getting less and less off social media for my own mental health. So over on LinkedIn is where I'm most active as far as social is concerned. And it's actually just my name, April Stroink. But you can also find me on the World Wide Web with our business is the Money Fix Institute, or also you can look at my website over on April Stroink as well. And as I said, we offer one-on-one services, but we also we have Wealth Care 101 that was designed for health and wellness professionals, which then moves into profit and practice, which is, again, once you have that foundation of then really analyzing those numbers. So yeah, happy to talk to whomever.
Wonderful. Well, we really appreciate you being here. This is a great conversation. I think it's been really valuable and interesting for us, I'm sure for our listeners as well.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for having me.
Thanks, April. Thanks for being here. All opinions expressed on the Chiro Money Show are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be considered financial, legal, accounting, or tax advice. Always consult your own team of licensed professionals before making decisions about your finances.